Okay, here I'm going to explain what a capacitor is, and when you hear my explanation of what a capacitor is, you're really going to wish that you never ever asked me to do an introductory to basic electronics video. My lack of education and my lack of college is going to come across in this ridiculous, asinine explanation. So, a capacitor allows you to store charge. So first of all, let me just show you what a capacitor is on the screen here. I'm going to show you what a capacitor is using Microsoft Paint. So let's shrink the screen here and open up Microsoft Paint. Before I open up Microsoft Paint, let me just show you what the symbol of it is here. So the symbol of a capacitor is a line, another line going the other way, another line going the other way, and then a line. So let's open up Microsoft Paint here. Alright, so let's make a capacitor, right? So here is a capacitor. This is a really uneven looking, fucked up capacitor. But what the hell? Yeah. Okay, so a lot of people say that a capacitor can pass AC, but it blocks DC, and this is one thing that's confusing. And again, it's often not explained in a manner in which anybody can get it, so I'm going to try to do that here. So here is DC, right? That is DC, a straight line. Whereas AC is this. It's this waving thingy. Now, knowing that a capacitor is two plates like this with an insulator between it, so this here is a plate. Oh my God, my handwriting here is as bad as it was when I was getting unsatisfactories in junior high school. And this here is an insulator. Okay, and this here is another plate, right? So DC is going to do this. And it's going to hit the plate, and it's going to go, and it's not going to get to the other side, right? So let's just get rid of that. Whereas AC, being a wave, is going to do this. It's going to go like zing, zoom, and then zing, and then it's going to be on the other side. So AC can go through a capacitor, whereas DC cannot go through a capacitor. And again, this explanation, if you're thinking that this explanation is just as much kindergarten as this picture, again, it is, but keep in mind that I have no formal electronics education. This is purely my own little self-taught way of figuring out and being able to explain to myself what a capacitor is, what it does, and how it works in a circuit. So you got a lot of different uses for a capacitor. So first things first is that it can actually store charge. So between this, these whole charge, this plates thing, if you put one of them on ground, again, remember, electricity always wants to go to ground, right? But it can't go through the insulator. So that means that this plate here is going to store a charge. So let's say you have a capacitor. Let's draw a capacitor. Where'd my mouse go? Here we go. So let's say you have a capacitor over here. And then over here you attach it to ground. So that's the symbol for ground. We're going to attach it to ground. And let's say you have power going through here, and it's going up and down a little, and it looks like that. You can attach the capacitor over here. Now remember, the capacitor is going to store charge. It can't get to the other side. The DC power, it's unable to make it to the other side, but the power is going to want to, it's going to want to have that path going to ground. But the power cannot get through the insulator. I'm just going to put I here for insulator. So what's going to happen is it's going to stick over here, and this is going to store charge. And how much charge a capacitor can store is something that's called measured capacitance, and it's probably measured in farads, which I'm pretty sure is the name of the dude who came up with this. Again, dare anybody use a name other than their own fucking name in order to name them, to explain what this stuff does. So what's going to happen is that this little moving up and down thingy is going to start to look kind of like this. It's going to start looking straight, as if I hit the line key and held shift down, which is useful because again you're able to turn this cluster of power into something smooth. And this is one of the things that a capacitor does really well. So a capacitor is very good at smoothing voltage, and it is also good at blocking DC. Because again, the DC, it gets stopped. So as you can see over here, the AC was able to jump over the plates. The DC just goes like this and then falls down. So for example, let's give a couple of practical examples of this. Another way to explain this is as follows. So let's say I get myself into a bar fight, right? Now, I'm really, really mad at the person who started insulting my girlfriend and insulting me and who threw a beer bottle at me. I want to kick his ass, so I'm really, really pissed off. I'm charged with some irritated, angry energy. So what I do is, let's say this is me right over here. This is Lewis. Let me just get my paint tool out of here. Let's see, what do we got? A paint tool, here we go. We got a brush. So that's me on this side of the capacitor. And I'm really, really mad. Now let's say that this insulator here is the, so this is going to be the bouncer. So we're going to label this B for bouncer. Bouncer, all right. Now and let's say over here, this other plate, the second plate, the one that's attached to ground, this is going to be the douchebag, right? This is the guy who insulted my girlfriend, who threw a beer bottle at me, so we're going to label that douche. Now, I am not going to try to, I'm not going to be really, really charged up and mad and pissed and irritated unless I really want to beat the crap out of who's on the other side of this insulator. But the bouncer, again, I'm 5'8", 150 pounds, even though I go to the gym every day, that bouncer, he's going to kick my ass. I can't get past this 6'8", 300-pound brick. So I'm really, really mad. I'm irritated. I'm super, super charged. I'm really energized. I have a lot of energy available. And you figured out a way to get me to stick to the bouncer, because I'm going to keep trying to get over the bouncer to beat the living shit out of the douchebag on the other side. So this is another way to consider a capacitor. So the electricity really, really wants to get to the other side, but it's not able to pass through the capacitor. That DC cannot make its way through the capacitor. It really wants to get to what's on the other side, but unfortunately the capacitor cannot get to what's over here because of this insulator that is in the way. So what happens is you have a lot of really, really strong charged up electricity stored on this plate of the capacitor here. Let's say, you know, when you plug something in that you're not supposed to, you unplug something, you hear all these vicious, miserable pops. You could get rid of a lot of that DC, which will kill your speakers instantly by having a capacitor on the front of your amplifier. So that pop doesn't go, that DC does not go through. That DC gets blocked. DC will kill a speaker very quickly. A speaker is meant to go back and forth, back and forth. It's not meant to be constant at a specific power, or else then it just, you know, it winds up, if it stays like that, you wind up melting the coil, because it never has a chance to go back down. Now, think back to what I was talking about with AC and DC. Think about how I said that AC is used to travel long distances because it's more efficient, and it is easier to get it from one end to the other, but the downside of it, which is that all of our electronics run on DC. So we want this, but what we're getting out of our wall outlet is this. So capacitors come in very handy to turn all of this into this by storing the charge. It's one of the components that are used to create DC. So there are bridge rectifiers, and there are many different types of circuits that turn AC into DC, and most of them make use of a capacitor. So let's give a practical example of this, shall we? Let's try looking at something like a backlight circuit so we can get a little bit of an idea of what's going on. So in the backlight boost circuit over here, this is going to, come on, give me a hand tool. Here we go. All right. So in a backlight boost circuit over here, this is going to be switching right over here. This is going to be switching from here to ground over and over again to get power to go through the inductor. We're going to go over how a boost circuit works later. If you have no idea what that means now, don't worry about it one bit. Now the problem is we're creating power through here, but it's not really going to be smooth. It's just going to be a bunch of pulsing, and also there's nothing to really store it. Again, we need up to 55 volts to power the screen. We need some real power here. And what we do is on the output of almost any type of power supply circuit, you have capacitors going to ground, assuming this is a power supply circuit that utilizes DC. So over here you have all of these capacitors on this power line over here, and what they're doing is they're both smoothing it so you have a flat DC voltage, but they're also storing power so that when the screen is going to ask for all this power, the capacitor will have it. It's not going to be a bunch of jagged, junky power coming out of here. It's going to be some smooth power, and you're going to have power in reserve. So the way this works, again, is you have all these capacitors going to ground. The capacitor cannot pass DC. When the DC hits this plate, it has no way of getting to the other side. But it wants to get to the other side because the other side is ground. Remember my other video where I'm talking about how electricity wants to make it to ground. It doesn't like being 12 volts. It doesn't like being 55 volts. It would like to be 0 volts. And if it sees an opportunity to become 0 volts, it will run in that direction. So the power winds up getting stored in this plate over here. It gets stored over here because it's trying as best as it can to stick over here, so that because it wants to get to the other side of that insulator inside that capacitor, it wants to make its way to ground. But it never does make its way to ground. It just gets stored here, and when the screen asks for power, it's very happy to rip it away from these capacitors and send it off to the screen, where it thinks that it's eventually going to make its way to ground. But as we all know, it doesn't make its way to ground. What it does is it makes its way to the light in the screen, it lights up the screen so that we can see it, and some of that power goes to ground. So this is a little bit of an idea of how a capacitor works. You also have capacitors in other parts of the circuit. You have capacitor by the 12-volt rail that powers the entire MacBook Pro. So let's just show you what that looks like here and what it is that they decide to do. So over here, you're going to see that there are two capacitors over here. So this is a buck converter, and if you don't know what that is, again, we're going to discuss this in a future video. Don't be scared if you don't know what that is. So right out here on the output of the buck converter, you have a capacitor going to ground and this other capacitor going to ground that, again, they're here to store power, but they're also here to smooth out the signal. And you have one end on the DC end where you want the DC power to be going to the system, and the other end is the ground. This is how a capacitor works. This is kind of how it's used. So a capacitor can store charge, and also based on how a capacitor works, again, because it is two charged plates like this, the DC is not going to be able to go through the plate, but the AC is going to go through the plate. And this helps us because, again, a lot of electricity is about manipulating the electrons to do what we want them to do, and a capacitor is one of the tools that we use to manipulate the electricity into doing what we want it to do.